back, everyone, to our show, Climate Conversations. My name is Jabin, and I'm here with
Victoria,
Jamelia,
Rebel.
And here on our show, Climate Conversations, we discuss and learn topics based on environmental and climate-related issues and changes, spreading the word on how to make the world a better place. Today, we will be speaking to Robert Boyd about the Toronto Community Housing, TCHC, environmental policies, programs, or plans in Regent Park. Robert, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Robert Boyd. My title is I'm the Senior Construction Manager at Toronto Community Housing, TCHC. My responsibility is the rest of the revitalization of Regent Park in downtown Toronto.
So what are some of your day-to-day tasks?
I'll tell you that one of the things that I like the most about my job is that no 2 days are ever the same. There's always something new, unexpected that comes up. So that's day to day, very hard to answer. But broadly speaking, I represent TCHC. You can think of me as the client representative for liaising with our construction managers, consulting engineers and architects, and so on and so forth. So I'm sort of like, if you imagine somebody, if somebody was to design a house for you, you would be, the client would speak to all those people. I represent TCHC as the client speaking to all those people.
that's great. So for our next question is, we're wondering, how long have you worked with TCHC, Robert?
I've been doing this for about 3.5 years. Before that, I'm a registered architect, and before that, I worked for 25 years as a registered architect in a little bit in Vancouver, but mostly in Toronto.
That's pretty cool.
Could you give us a brief history of how the TCHC started becoming heavily involved in Regent Park?
Yeah, Regent Park, if you go way, way back to before the 1940s, let's say, Regent Park was a very, very derelict neighborhood with very poor housing, very bad housing that was constructed and eventually, soon, right after the Second World War, it all got torn down and rebuilt into the way that people have known Regent Park since between the Second World War or since the end of the Second World War and say the year 2000. That was built in the late 1940s, early 1950s, and then in around 1998-ish or 6-ish, the late 1990s, those buildings were owned by the provincial government. In the late 1990s, the provincial government got out of the business of providing social housing and downloaded that responsibility to municipalities like the City of Toronto. So overnight, the City of Toronto were handed responsibility for social housing buildings across the City of Toronto, including all of the buildings in Regent Park. So Toronto community, that was the City of Toronto. So the City of Toronto created a corporation that they own 100% of. TCHC as an agency of the City of Toronto. Think of the way that the CBC is owned and operated by the it's owned by the federal government. TCHC is owned by the City of Toronto, similarly. And TCHC was created by the City of Toronto to manage that huge portfolio of all those buildings, including the buildings in Regent Park. The revitalization of Regent Park then started. It was the kickstart, from what I understand of the history, summarizing very briefly, was that the whole thing was kickstarted by local residents who wanted to improve their housing. So technically, TCHC was created in the late 1990s and has been involved in Regent Park since then.
All right. So for our next question, what are some of the environmental policies that the TCHC follow?
At a you know, at the beginning of the revitalization of Regent Park, so back in the early 2000s, TCHC at the time followed what were considered to be the cutting edge sustainability guidelines. They were called, the acronym is LEED, L-E-E-D, which stands for Leadership in, oh God, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. Leadership in Environmental and something design, sorry. And it'll come back to me in a second. Anyway, so, and there are different tiers there. There's basic LEED certification, and then there's LEED bronze, LEED silver, LEED gold, LEED platinum. All of the buildings in the first couple of phases of the revitalization were built to LEED gold standard, which at the time was an extremely ambitious, nobody else was really doing that in the construction of large residential buildings. Since then, eventually the city of Toronto imposed on all new construction in the city a series of green standards called the Toronto Green Standards, or TGS, and every few years they become stricter and stricter. And so what builders and developers have to do becomes more and more friendly to the environment, if you will, or more and more responsible insofar as mitigating, impacts on the climate crisis. And those requirements have everything. It talks about parking requirements. It tries to discourage the use of cars, encourage the use of bicycles, reduce the amount of energy used to construct buildings or to heat and cool buildings. And as I say, they're getting more and more strict to the point now where they're even starting to regulate the amount of embodied carbon that goes into building materials themselves. So I'll explain what embodied carbon is. Anytime you produce anything, be it a dinner plate or a piece of furniture or a car or anything that is manufactured, requires energy to manufacture it. That energy usually is carbon-based. In other words, depending on what's being made, there might be a lot of natural gas or even coal that's burned to create the energy to make that product. And so there's a certain amount of carbon that goes into the atmosphere to make that product, that single dinner plate. And so we can talk about the amount of carbon used to create that dinner plate. And that's what we call the carbon, embodied carbon of that dinner plate. Some construction materials have very high carbon, levels of embodied carbon. For example, concrete and steel, which require huge, aluminum as well, that require huge amounts of energy to produce. And so the new TGS standards encourage builders to move away from using materials that have those very high levels of embodied carbon. And there, if you want a full breakdown of what's in the TGS standards, you can go to the City of Toronto's website, Google and enter TGS into their search engine, and it'll take you right to it, and it's all explained in very clear language there. It's very, very in-depth, too in-depth for me to be able to explain now. But the upshot of all of this is that these are some really cutting edge, very, very advanced, probably some of the most advanced sustainability guidelines or requirements, I should say, in North America, among the most stringent in the world, I would say. And TCHC builds all of its buildings to meet, at minimum, those guidelines. The The new buildings that we're going to build, starting in a couple of years, won't be permitted to burn any natural gas to heat and cool them. So they'll have to be either electric or perhaps a geothermal system. But there will be no natural gas used to power the buildings.
All right, so as a follow-up question, does the TCHC take into account the residents' input when following these policies?
Absolutely. We consult very regularly with all of the residents in our communities, not just in Regent Park, but all of our communities, and we listen very carefully to their input. I love the fact that our residents are extremely concerned about the climate crisis. And, so we have basically the city on the one hand that is imposing these requirements for sustainability, and not just on TCHC, but on the entire construction industry. And we have to build to those standards as well. But on the other side, we also have our residents who are pushing us hard to do maybe even more than what's required by the City of Toronto, and we listen very carefully to them, and we do as much as we possibly can to satisfy their needs.
You mentioned keeping up with standards. So what happens when buildings that met policies when they were built, but they're now subpar in like the eyes of the new standards? What happened to those buildings?
That's a really tough issue to deal with. The buildings in Regent Park are actually relatively new. So they already have, and they were built to LEED Gold standard at minimum, and then later on to the TCHC standards, the TGS standards, which after a while exceeded even the LEED standards. So we dropped LEED. And so the buildings are actually already very, very well performing from a sustainability point of view. That's one thing. The second thing is that all of the buildings in Regent Park are connected to the Regent Park District Energy System, which is owned by TCHC indirectly. And what that means is, we have a power plant in Regent Park that supplies hot and cold water to all of the new buildings in Regent Park. That hot and cold water is used to heat in the buildings in the winter and cool them in the summer. And it's coming from a local plant located almost smack dab in the middle of Regent Park. And the beauty of that is that there's a couple of things. First of all, it means that the buildings themselves are about, on average, it's estimated around 10% more energy efficient than they would be if they were not connected to the district energy system. The other thing that means is that if we make that plant more efficient, just by upgrading the equipment in that one plant, we effectively make all of the buildings more efficient at the same time, because they're all connected to that plant. So it makes upgrading the sustainability, the efficiency of these buildings much, much easier, much more cost effective. And so that plant does get, from time to time, as new technology comes online, it does get upgraded. And it currently does still burn natural gas, though there are plans in place to switch it over to electricity.
So we know about the ongoing revitalization that's been happening over the past decade. So that brings us to the question that is, would tearing down these buildings and reconstructing them be better for the environment?
Sorry, do you mean tearing down the buildings that we just finished building? That we built in the past 15 years, say?
No. The buildings that have still yet to be torn down.
Oh, absolutely. The buildings that were built back in the 1940s and 1950s are extremely inefficient. They were built to the standards of the day, and at the time, global warming, climate crisis, climate change weren't in anybody's vocabulary. And they were built to what was considered to be the top standard, the construction standard of the day. consequently, they perform very poorly from a sustainability point of view. When we construct new buildings there's only a few of those buildings that are left anymore in Regent Park. And we will be tearing them down and reconstructing them over the coming 10 years or so. It takes a while to these projects take a while. And we will be building them to, at minimum, the TGS standards that are in effect at the time. Our residents and the community may push us to do more, and we will wherever possible. And those buildings will be either completely electrified or be on a geothermal system, and which means that they will burn zero natural gas and will make no contribution or an extremely small contribution to emitting greenhouse gases. So that's a long-winded way of saying yes, absolutely.
So talking back about the policies, are there any mathematical data to back up the environment in Regent Park is better off due to following these environmental policies?
It's a bit of a tricky question. Not there isn't, in the sense that, it's impossible to build it's impossible to compare two buildings directly because every building is different, right? And even when you're looking at the performance of a brand new building, even against itself, it's impossible to know, because it's not like you can build the building using one set of technology and then build it again in the exact same spot using another technology and seeing how much better it is. That's just not feasible to do. What we do know is when buildings are designed, there's some very sophisticated energy modeling that happens on computers where they're able to, our engineers are able to very accurately measure the amount of energy that a building is likely to consume. And then after the building is built, we see how the building is performing compared to how we thought it was going to perform. And if it's performing not as well, then we go in and investigate, and we have to tweak the equipment to try to bring it back closer to where we thought it was going to perform. Now, I can tell you that by the time we start building the next building in Regent Park in about, we'll start construction in 2, maybe 3 years, hopefully 2 years. That building will use about 80% less energy than a typical building that is being built now. That's a huge reduction in energy.
So how has the technology and like the TCHC managed buildings like helped mitigate the climate crisis? Because I remember before you were talking about like geothermal heating systems.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, how has the technology like in TCHC managed buildings helped mitigate the climate crisis?
Well, as I explained before, in Regent Park, the buildings are on a district energy system. Mm-hmm. There aren't that many district energy systems around. Part of the reason for that is that you really need to be in a position to develop large tracts of land. You can't really put in a district energy system for just 1 or 2, 3 buildings. It's not economically feasible. Because of the size of Regent Park, we're able to do that. And as I explained before, that right off the bat, that allows our buildings to be about 10%-ish more efficient. And then that plant was built in the early 2000s. And since then has been, is continually upgrading to make the equipment more and more efficient. So, you know, we bring in better technology and so on, and eventually we will electrify it so it won't burn any more natural gas. In the last couple of phases of Regent Park, the new buildings are, we hope, going to be on a geothermal system. So what that means is, just to explain super briefly, you know, the earth, if you dig a hole in the ground, it's keeps a constant temperature no matter what the temperature is outside. So what that means is you can pump, what we do is in a geothermal system is we drill wells deep into the earth, and then we pump water into them, and then that water may be cold, and when it comes back up to the surface, that water has been warmed to a pretty high temperature by the earth, and then we can circulate that water in the building to heat it. Likewise, in the summer, if it's 30 degrees out, like today, if we pump the water, warm water, down into those wells, those tubes, and when it comes back up, it's been cooled. And then we can circulate that water in the building and use it to cool the building. So the only energy that you use is some electrical energy to pump the water up and down the tubes and circulate it through the building. But that energy use is this much compared to the energy that you would typically expend to heat and cool a building, either electrically or using natural gas or some other source.
All right. So, can residents expect to see the TCHC put in place any new programs, policies, or plans that can help the environment even more?
Sure. The main policies that we are required to build to are imposed on us by the City of Toronto. And they're imposed not just on us, but on the entire construction industry across the entire city. They're imposed on us, though, 4 years ahead of everybody else. So if a requirement, the new requirements that will come into effect in the next couple of years won't come into effect on the overall construction industry for 4 years after us. So in 2 years, we've got to build these buildings that use zero natural gas. If the rest of the construction industry won't have to meet that requirement until 6 years from now. So in that sense, these new requirements are, you know, we're well ahead of the game in that respect. We do quite a bit of construction, and you know, we're one of the largest developers in the city as we go through rebuilding social housing, and so it makes a significant impact. Eventually, the entire construction industry across the city will catch up.
Wow, that was great. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I just want to say that, you know, I'm a very ardent supporter of measures to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. I have a daughter who is 13 and a half years old. I want to do everything I possibly can to make sure that the planet that I leave her is, you know, as good as I can have helped to make it. And the people that I work with, I can tell you, feel the same way. And I think that what we're doing is we're among North American and perhaps global leaders when it comes to mitigating our impact on the environment. And I take a lot of pride in that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert, for this interview and using your time to have this interview with us.
It was my pleasure.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I think that was a great conversation. I hope our viewers learned a lot about the TCHC's environmental plans and goals in Regent Park. So what do you guys think were some main takeaways for this interview?
For me, it was just that they're trying to make the buildings net zero, like carbon emissions. I think that's
Right.
really good.
Yeah, I think that too.
Yeah, I think he really does want to like try helping the community in an
Mhm.
environmental way.
I like the stuff that he was saying about the geothermal.
The thing where they're all like connected.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea to like use the earth as your like heating source. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and what about you, Rubel?
I love how the buildings are gonna be built around the new standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Mhm.
Very insightful.
Okay, that is it for today's conversation, today's interview. I hope you guys liked it. Anything else you guys would like to add?
See you in the next episode.
Bye.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out all of our social media platforms. For more information, check out our website.